When the Anglo-Saxons invaded England in the 5th century, 4 major kingdoms would rise from the ashes. These were Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, and East Anglia. The Anglo-Saxons, who were originally pagans, would mostly convert to Christianity, with the pagan kings often converting for political reasons, such as the imposition by a more powerful king, to gain legitimacy, or the Christian promise of gaining immortality upon one's death. One man who resisted, however, was Penda, the king of Mercia, described as the last great pagan warrior king among the Anglo-Saxons, and a most warlike man of the royal race of the Mercians. His destruction sounded the death of English paganism as a political and religious ideology, and thus all of England's kingdoms would fall under the spell of Christianity, with their original pagan traditions, customs, and way of life fading from living memory. This is the tale of Penda, the killer of kings, a man whose will was forged in war, and who was unbending till the end, being the last Anglo-Saxon king to die a pagan. It was he who forged Mercia into a mighty kingdom, and it was he who allowed Mercia to become a dominant kingdom, which would go on to define England's political landscape for centuries to come. This is his story. Penda is first mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in the year 626, in which it states, "This year, Penda succeeded to the kingdom of Mercia, and reigned 30 years. Penda was the son of Pibba, Pibba of Creoda, Creoda of Sinwald, Sinwald of Cneba, Cneba of Isel, Isel of Eomer, Eomer of Anglothau, Anglothau of Offa, Offa of Wermund, Wermund of Whittleseg, and Whittleseg of Woden." In the days of old, when the Anglo-Saxon kings ruled, they were often linked to the divine through personal kinship with the god Woden, also known as the Allfather. Old English royal genealogies record Woden as the ancestor of all the kings of the English royal lines. These kings would retain their status through being direct descendants of Woden, their most revered and worshipped god. Penda belonged to the House of Isel, who were a dynasty of Mercian kings during the 7th and 8th centuries. They were named after King Isel, a legendary figure of the migration period, who established the kingdom of Mercia and was its first king. The Historia Britonum, meaning the history of the Britons, records that Penda's father Pibba had 12 sons, including Penda. It is unknown if Penda was the eldest. However, kinslaying for the throne was common during the Anglo-Saxon age, as it wasn't always the eldest who would take power, but the man with the means to take the throne, often through military might, or who was the greatest warrior and political player. Most of Penda's early life remains a mystery, as he is first mentioned in the sources once he became the king of Mercia. Thus, how he became king and his upbringing is unknown. However, he would have had the typical upbringing of Anglo-Saxon royalty, learning to fight with the sword, spear, and axe. He also would have been immersed in the beliefs and customs of Anglo-Saxon paganism, which included honouring the gods and performing rituals. Very few records of Penda's reign have survived the passage of time. The most significant source we have is Bede's History of the English People, written relatively close to Penda's own lifetime, though fragments of information can also be found in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Historia Britonum. Many of these were composed centuries after Penda's death, casting a long shadow of uncertainty over their reliability. Among these, Bede's account remains the most detailed, and perhaps the most influential. It is within these pages that Penda's legacy begins to take shape, though often cast in the role of the villain, standing defiantly on what history came to regard as the wrong side of faith and fate. However, as we know, the victor writes the histories, and as Christianity triumphed over paganism, one can only assume that Penda was a hero among the defenders of the old beliefs. Edwin was the king of Deira and Mercia, which together would later be known as the Kingdom of Northumbria. In around the year 624, Edwin became the most powerful ruler in Britain. Bede includes him in his list of kings who exercised imperium over the other Anglo-Saxon monarchs. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle gives him the title Bretwalda, or ruler of Britain. In the year 627, Edwin was baptized, and like many Christians, he sought to convert as many people in his kingdom as possible. As Bretwalda and the most powerful man in Britain, Christianity would spread like wildfire. At the time, Mercia was not yet counted among the most powerful of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. It was a realm still in the midst of expansion, striving to solidify its borders and assert its authority, while many of its territories remained the subject of fierce contest with rival kingdoms. By the time Penda rose to power, nearly all neighbouring realms had either embraced Christianity or were well on their way to conversion. In this changing landscape, Mercia stood alone, a resolute stronghold of the old gods, a realm of heathenism in a sea of emerging Christian faith. Penda viewed Edwin's growing power with concern, so he would ally himself with the King of Gwynedd, a powerful Welsh kingdom, in order to challenge Edwin. This would result in the Battle of Hatfield Chase. According to Bede, this is what transpired during the battle. Edwin ruled gloriously for 17 years over the English and British peoples, 6 of which, as mentioned earlier, he spent as a Christian. During his reign, Cadwalla, the king of the Britons, rose in rebellion against him, with the support of Penda, a fierce warrior of royal Mercian blood. A great battle took place on the plain known as Heathfield. There, on October the 12th, in the year 633 AD, Edwin was killed at the age of 47, and his army was either slain or scattered. In the same battle, his son Alfred, a brave young man, also fell. Another son, Alfred, was forced by circumstances to seek refuge with King Penda, but was later killed by him during Oswald's reign, in betrayal of an oath. This marked a time of terrible slaughter for the church and the people of Northumbria. Penda, along with the entire Mercian people, remained idol worshippers and strangers to the Christian faith. Thus, Penda won a great victory as he brought King Edwin's head to York as a trophy. The mighty Bretwalda was dead, and his Christian ideologies for a time were held at bay, as his successors reverted to paganism. Ecgric and Sigebert were the joint kings of East Anglia during that time, and had converted to Christianity following the Hiberno-Scottish mission, which was a series of expeditions in the 6th and 7th centuries by Gaelic missionaries originating from Ireland that spread Celtic Christianity in Scotland, Wales, England and France. Aidan of Lindisfarne established a Bible school in the year 633 at the island of Lindisfarne, and from Northumbria, Aidan's mission spread throughout the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and similar Bible schools were established in Mercia, Deira, Mercia, and East Anglia. It is estimated that 2/3 of the Anglo-Saxon population were converted to Celtic Christianity at this time. However, Penda saw an opportunity to attack the land of East Anglia in the year 636. The East Anglian soldiers, knowing the battle-hardened Mercians would be valiant warriors, urged Sigebert to lead them in battle. However, King Sigebert refused. According to Bede, his own warriors seized him and threw him out of the monastery. They then carried him into the ranks of the army, hoping that the soldiers would be less disposed to flee in the presence of him, as he had once been a notable and brave commander. But he, still keeping in mind his profession, whilst in the midst of a royal army, would carry nothing in his hand but a wand, and was killed by King Ecgric, and the pagans pressing on all their army was either slaughtered or dispersed. Thus, Penda had just slain 2 more Christian kings, and his power was now being consolidated. To the north and to the east, Northumbria and East Anglia had tasted his wrath, and no Christian army could overcome him in battle, and Mercia was quickly becoming the most dominant kingdom in England. Although Penda himself was a staunch pagan, he allowed his son Prince Paeda to convert and become a Christian. Bede elaborates on the account. At this time, the Middle Angles under Prince Paeda, the son of King Penda, received the faith and sacraments of the truth. Being an excellent youth, he was by his father elevated to the throne of that nation, and came to Oswy, king of the Northumbrians, requesting to have his daughter Elfrida given to him to wife, but could not abstain his desires unless he would embrace the faith of Christ and be baptized with the nation which he governed. When he heard the preaching of truth, the promise of the heavenly kingdom, and the hope of resurrection and future immortality, he declared that he would willingly become a Christian. Nor did King Penda obstruct the preaching of the word among his people. This portrays Penda as a tolerant king, although the old faith, customs and traditions were slowly fading into memory, seemingly from foreign missionaries. As a descendant of Woden, a king was believed to inherit divine wisdom and supernatural strength. Yet noble blood alone was not enough to claim a crown. Lineage from the gods did not guarantee divine favour. Such favour had to be proven. Before ascending to the throne, a man had to demonstrate that he truly possessed the sacred power and insight worthy of kingship, often through victories in battle, or through extraordinary gifts such as prophecy or healing. In the case of Penda, his many triumphs in war would have served as undeniable proof to his people that he was indeed a true son of Woden, an earthly vessel of the war god's might and fury. Though it is certain that Penda adhered to the old pagan faith, the extent of his personal devotion remains unclear. It has been suggested that his resistance to Christianity may have stemmed from not ignorance or stubbornness, but from a belief that Christ was not a fitting patron for a warrior king. Penda's repeated victories over Christian monarchs likely reinforced this view. Among the Anglo-Saxons, divine favour was believed to manifest in earthly power, and the rise and fall of a king reflected the strength of the god he served. Choosing a faith was, in effect, choosing an ally in the eternal struggle for power, and in Penda's eyes, Christ was simply not the strongest ally. His ancestor Woden was. His victories may have led him to believe that he was a warrior king protected by the gods, and that his pagan gods were more effective in war than the Christian god. Following the demise of King Edwin of Northumbria, his nephew Oswald ascended to the throne. Oswald had vanquished Cadwallon, the king of the Britons, who had aligned himself with Penda at the Battle of Hatfield. In the year 634, Oswald subsequently re-established Northumbrian dominance over much of Britain. However, Penda remained hostile to Northumbrian power, or at least was perceived as a threat by Oswald. The precise cause of the war that culminated in the Battle of Maserfield remains unknown. The historian Bede, writing in the following century, portrayed Oswald as a saintly figure, and his desire to present Oswald in a favourable light may have led him to overlook Oswald's aggressive military campaigns. Penda once again allied himself with the Welsh, commanding an army of roughly 3,200 soldiers, while Oswald's forces numbered only 1,000 men. The Battle of Maserfield resulted in a decisive defeat for the Northumbrians. Bede recounts the tale of Oswald praying for the souls of his soldiers as he faced imminent death. Oswald's body was dismembered, with his head and arms displayed on poles. The remnants were later retrieved by his brother and successor Oswiu. As Penda was a pagan and Oswald was a Christian, the latter was subsequently venerated as a martyr and saint. Bede documents numerous miracles attributed to Oswald's bones and the site of his death. In the 12th century, Henry of Huntingdon wrote of the battle. It is said the plain of Massafield was white with the bones of the saints. The Historia Brittonum attributes Penda's victory to a diabolical agency, but the characterization of the battle as a clash between Christians and pagans may be oversimplified, given that there were likely Christian Welsh fighting on Penda's side. The 20th century historian D.P. Kirby noted that the battle left Penda as without question the most powerful Mercian ruler so far to have emerged in the Midlands, for Oswald was the Bretwalda, being recognised as the most powerful man in England before his demise at the hands of Penda. According to Frank Stenton, an English historian of Anglo-Saxon England, the Battle of Massafield elevated Penda to the status of the most formidable king in England. With the spread of Christianity among the Anglo-Saxon kings, it seems that Penda's ancestral deity Woden was challenging Christ for dominion over England. In the year 645, the throne of Wessex was held by Cenwell, one of the last pagan kings in Anglo-Saxon England. He had been married to the sister of Penda, the powerful king of Mercia. However, when Cenwell chose to repudiate Penda's sister in favour for another wife, the slight did not go unanswered. Enraged, Penda marched against Wessex, driving Cenwell into exile in East Anglia. Who ruled Wessex during Cenwell's years in exile remains uncertain, though it's widely believed that Penda may have exercised control, despite the absence of surviving records to confirm it. At that time, King Anna ruled East Anglia, a pious and cultured sovereign who enriched the monastery at Knobbersburg with splendid buildings and treasures. He would go on to found a monastery there, further establishing his devotion to the Christian faith. Yet in the year 651, Penda once again brought war upon East Anglia, attacking the monastery itself. Anna and his men rushed to its defence, holding off the Mercians just long enough for the monks to flee with their sacred books and relics. Though the monastery was spared, Anna was not victorious. Defeated in battle, he was forced into exile. Anna returned to reclaim his kingdom in the year 654, but word of his return reached Penda, who once again led a mighty Mercian host into East Anglia. A second and more devastating assault followed. The armies of Penda and Anna met in battle, and the East Anglians were defeated. Many fell that day, including King Anna himself and his son Jurmin. In the aftermath of this bloody victory, Penda appointed his own son Peada as the ruler of Middle Anglia, further expanding Mercian dominance over the Anglo-Saxon realms. With the south and east subdued, Penda turned his gaze northward once more, unleashing war upon Oswiu of Bernicia in his own territory. According to the historian Bede, Penda cruelly ravaged the land of the Northumbrians far and wide, laying waste to the countryside and besieging the royal stronghold of Bamborough. When the Mercians failed to take the fortress by force or siege, they attempted to burn it to the ground, but Bede recounts that a divine wind summoned by the prayers of Saint Aidan miraculously turned the flames back upon the attackers. Aidan is said to have cried, "Behold, Lord, what mischief Penda does," and the heavens answered. Years later, after Aidan's death, Penda returned to the region and again led a brutal campaign. He laid waste to the land with fire and sword, even burning the very church where Aidan had died. Yet, as Bede writes, The wooden post against which the saint had leaned in his final moments remained miraculously untouched by the flames. This was believed to be a sign of divine intervention. No open battles are recorded between Penda and Oswiu during this time, suggesting that Oswiu may have avoided direct conflict, perhaps recognizing that he could not yet match the might of the Mercian king. Over the years, King Penda had carved out a legacy of dominance through a series of resounding military victories. Chief among them, his triumphs over the once mighty Northumbrians. Yet again, the aging warlord would march northward, his sights set on overthrowing Oswiu, the king of Mercia. The precise cause of this final campaign remains uncertain. Though Bede tells us that Penda had shown tolerance for Christian preaching within Mercia, it has been suggested that he viewed the spread of Bernician-backed Christianity into Mercia and Middle Anglia as a form of spiritual colonization, an encroachment that threatened his own sovereignty. Others have speculated that Penda sought to prevent Oswiu from reuniting Northumbria, wary that he might restore the kingdom's former glory, once embodied by Edwin and Oswald. To prepare for the coming storm, Penda rallied his allies from East Anglia and Wales, assembling a formidable host led by 30 warlords. Oswiu, brother to the slain Oswald, ruled only the northern portion of Northumbria, Bernicia, and soon found himself under siege in a now lost stronghold somewhere in the northern wilds. According to the Historia Brittonum, Oswiu, desperate to save his kingdom, offered treasure in exchange for peace. Penda is said to have accepted it, distributing the wealth among his British allies. Yet Bede offers a starkly different account, claiming that Penda refused the offer outright, vowing instead to utterly destroy the entire race of Oswiu, sparing neither high nor low. Compounding Oswiu's vulnerability, his own son Ecgfrith was at the time held as a hostage within Mercia, giving Penda yet another advantage. For reasons that remain unclear, perhaps the result of political manoeuvring or omens ill-interpreted, Penda's army turned southward, perhaps intending to return home, but desertions began to sap the strength of the Mercian alliance. Cadafel of Gwynedd fled under the cover of night with his men, earning the scornful name Battle Shirker. Ethelwald of Deira likewise withdrew, choosing to await the outcome from a place of safety. Only King Ethelhere of the East Angles remained loyal, standing beside Penda on the eve of battle. Oswiu, still vastly outnumbered, gave battle to Penda. Bede recounts the tale. Oswiu, with a mere handful of warriors, stood against the enemy, said to be 3 times his size, 30 legions, led by renowned commanders. Oswiu and his son Alfred fought with desperate courage. The pagans were routed, their 30 captains and countless soldiers fled or were cut down. Among the fallen was Ethelhere of East Anglia, brother to the slain King Anna, whose involvement in the war had drawn his kingdom into destruction. The battle was fought near the river Winwade, swollen beyond its banks by heavy rains. As the Mercians fled, many were not slain by sword, but drowned in the floodwaters. Nature, it seemed, had turned against them. Penda himself lay among the fallen, and thus his reign ended. The last great pagan warlord of England. With his fall, the old gods faded, and the tide of Christianity swept ever more firmly across the land. Penda was the last great pagan warrior king among the Anglo-Saxons, his warrior status unquestionable. The historian Frank Stenton wrote this of Penda: "He was himself a great fighting king of the most honoured in the Germanic saga, the lord of many princes, and the leader of a vast retinue attracted to his service by his success and generosity. Many stories must have been told about his dealings with other kings, but none of them have survived. His wars can only be described from the standpoint of his enemies. What kind of a man must he have been, when so many of the kings he vanquished were later raised to sainthood? Edwin of Northumbria, whom Penda struck down at Hatfield Chase, was later venerated as a saint. Oswald of Mercia, who Penda defeated and slew at Marsfield, likewise became a martyr and was sainted. Even Prince Jermyn, the young son of King Anna of East Anglia, himself slain by Penda, later rose to saintly status. Those who perished by Penda's sword were transformed into saints, their deaths woven into hallowed legends, adorned with miracles whispered through the generations. Yet, while their stories grew in glory, what of the tale of the lone pagan king who defied the rising tide of Christendom? What of the man who vanquished not one, but two kings hailed as Bretwalders, the so-called overlords of Britain? Had the chroniclers not been so steeped in Christian zeal, had they not cast Penda in the shadows of their theology, perhaps he too would have been called Bretwalder, for in power and influence, he was equal to any who bore the title. His legacy, obscured by the disdain of Christian scribes, might have stood beside the great names of early England, not as a villain or outcast, but as the King of Kings. When Penda fell in battle, he died the death he had lived for, the death of a warrior. Yet with his fall, the flame of paganism in England flickered and faded. His sons, perhaps wary of endless conflict, or perhaps seduced by the unifying power of the Church, embraced Christianity, and with that, the old gods of the Angles and Saxons were silenced. But there is one thing the chroniclers could not take from him, one truth that endures beyond the dogma and the disdain, and that was that Penda was a fierce warrior, unyielding and unbending, and in that, he became a legend. King Offa of Mercia is considered to be one of the most powerful Anglo-Saxon kings to ever live, styling himself as the first king of the English. After a series of battles and political masterstrokes, King Offa would become the most powerful man in Britain, although we have no first-hand accounts of his reign, only remnants of his past glory. What remains are clues to his greatness, such as Offa's Dyke, which was the construction of a great earth wall and ditch, or dyke, which has been described as stretching from sea to sea. The work required thousands of men, and each section seems to have been built by people from a different district. It is regarded as one of the greatest constructions in the history of Anglo-Saxon England, reflecting his scope of power, wealth, and vast resources. Historians often overlook Offa due to lacking source material regarding his reign. A key source for this period is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. However, the Chronicle was a West Saxon production and is sometimes thought to be biased in favour of Wessex. Hence, it may not acutely convey the extent of power achieved by Offa, a Mercian, but I believe him to rank as one of the greatest Anglo-Saxon rulers. This is his forgotten story. Offa is one of the kings mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as a descendant of the god Woden, an ancestral claim common among the royal houses, even though by this time all Anglo-Saxon kings were Christian in faith. He was born in around the year 730. He was the son of Thingthrith, a lesser noble and a distant kinsman of the then reigning Mercian king Ethelbald. Ethelbald had revived Mercia's fortunes, restoring its former splendour in a manner reminiscent of the mighty king Penda. His reign, which lasted from the years 716 to 757, brought strength and prestige to the kingdom. Yet, his end was brutal. According to Bede's History of the English, Ethelbald was treacherously murdered at night by his own bodyguards, though their motives remain unknown. In the aftermath of this regicide, a man named Beornred seized the throne. His rule, however, was brief and tyrannical. According to Bede, Offa, having put Beornred to flight, sought to gain the kingdom of the Mercians by bloodshed. This strongly suggests that Offa challenged Beornred in battle, routed his forces, and forced him into exile. Though Offa was not the son of a king, he came from the royal line of the Islingers, a dynasty tracing its origins to Isel, the legendary founder of Mercia, said to have led his people from across the North Sea to Britain in around the year 515 during the Great Anglo-Saxon migration. This noble lineage provided Offa with a legitimate claim to the Mercian throne, which he secured in the year 758. Once crowned, Offa faced the daunting task of consolidating his rule and legitimizing his authority in a kingdom newly established. The early years of his reign are cloaked in silence. The historian Frank Stenton observes, "No Mercian record has survived from this period." By the year 664, the outline of his reign becomes clearer. Offa was shaping a kingdom by the sword, determined to unite and command with both force and foresight. As soon as Offa ascended the Mercian throne, his sights were set on expansion. His gaze quickly turned southward to the Kingdom of Kent, and by the year 765, Offa appears to have begun asserting direct authority over the region, evidenced by a number of charters he either issued or confirmed in Kent. Though he lost control of the kingdom during the 770s, when Ealhmund emerged as king, Offa reclaimed it by the year 785. Ealhmund was likely killed or exiled, and his son, the future King Egbert of Wessex, was forced to flee into exile. Sussex, long ruled by several minor kings, gradually fell under Offa's sway as well. In the first 13 years of his reign, Offa confirmed charters in western and central Sussex. By the year 771, he had subdued eastern Sussex through military action, effectively bringing the whole kingdom under his control. Charters from the year 772 reveal his complete authority over the region, with its former kings reduced to the status of an ealdorman. His overlordship over the other smaller kingdoms is less thoroughly recorded, but by this time, Mercian supremacy was steadily expanding. East Anglia offered Offa another opportunity for dominance. The kingdom's royal line of the Woofingers, descended from the legendary King Wuffa and long regarded as the ruling house, came to an end in the year 749 with the death of King Elfwald. With the Woofinger line extinguished, Offa saw a chance to assert control. A young noble named Ethelbert rose to kingship thereafter, but his rule would end in tragedy. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Offa had King Ethelbert of East Anglia executed. Offa, king of the Mercians, commanded the head of King Ethelbert to be struck off. The tale of his death later grew into a legend. In around the year 1080, the Passio Sancti Ethelberti records the story of a virtuous and godly young king, elected for his wisdom and grace. Pressured into marrying Offa's daughter Eadbert, Ethelbert journeyed to Mercia against the foreboding warnings of his mother. In the end, it was said that Queen Cynthryth, Offa's wife, poisoned her husband's mind with suspicion and deceit, ultimately leading to Ethelbert's murder and beheading. Whether these accounts are fact or moralized fiction, Offa nonetheless claimed East Anglia as part of his dominion, extending his authority over yet another kingdom. To the south, the Kingdom of Wessex was ruled by King Cinwulf, a direct male descendant of Cerdic, the legendary leader of the Anglo-Saxon migration and the founding monarch of Wessex. Throughout much of Offa's reign, Cinwulf had resisted Mercian supremacy, maintaining the independence of his kingdom. Tensions between the two kings eventually erupted into open conflict. In the year 779, the Battle of Bensington was fought. Though little is known of the battle itself, its outcome is clear. Offa emerged victorious. Despite his defeat, there is no indication that Cinwulf became subordinate to Offa thereafter. However, Cinwulf's rule came to a sudden and violent end in the year 786, when he was ambushed and killed during a dynastic quarrel, reportedly at the house of his mistress. Cinwulf's death created a power vacuum in Wessex, one that Offa swiftly exploited. He threw his support behind Beorhtric, a rival claimant to the throne, whose chief opponent was Egbert, grandfather of the future King Alfred the Great. To secure this alliance, Offa gave his daughter Eadbert in marriage to Beorhtric. Backed by Mercian power, Beorhtric defeated Egbert, forcing him into exile to the court of Charlemagne. In doing so, Beorhtric became a client king, ruling Wessex under Offa's shadow and protection. To the north, in the kingdom of Northumbria, Ethelred I held the crown. In the year 792, he married Ethelred, another daughter of Offa's, thereby becoming the Mercian king's son-in-law. While there is no direct evidence that Northumbria ever fell under Mercian dominion, Ethelred's marriage into Offa's family suggests a bond of alliance, if not subjugation. Notably, upon Offa's death, Ethelred was assassinated by a group of Northumbrian nobles, a fact that hints at his reliance on Offa's protection and the fragility of his rule without it. By these acts through war, diplomacy, and strategic marriages, Offa extended his influence across the entirety of England, from Kent and East Anglia to Wessex, and possibly even Northumbria. He imposed his authority over nearly every Anglo-Saxon kingdom. In his royal charters, Offa styled himself not only as the King of the Mercians, but also as the King of the English and of its surrounding peoples. These titles were more than grandiose claims. They reflected his far-reaching ambition and the reality of a king who, through conquest and cunning, had united much of England under Mercian rule. The relationship between Mercia and the neighbouring Welsh kingdoms in the 8th century was defined by tension, border skirmishes, and recurring warfare. The Welsh launched frequent raids into Mercian lands, threatening settlements, disrupting agriculture and trade routes. These constant incursions demanded a strong and lasting response. King Offa, determined to protect his western frontier and assert dominance, waged several military campaigns against the Welsh, with recorded expeditions in the years 778, 784, and 796. Yet it was not through warfare alone that Offa sought to secure his kingdom. In response to these ongoing threats, Offa ordered the construction of one of the most ambitious defensive works in early medieval Britain, Offa's Dyke. This vast earthwork would stretch along the length of the border between Mercia and the Welsh kingdom. Its presence made it increasingly difficult for Welsh raiders to penetrate Mercian lands undetected. The completion of Offa's Dyke would mark a turning point. With his western borders more secure, Offa was free to concentrate on the internal consolidation of Mercia, the expansion of his influence over other Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and the promotion of trade and economic stability. The Dyke itself, vast and enduring, is widely regarded as the most significant construction undertaken by pre-literate peoples of Britain, reflecting Offa's authority, resources, and far-reaching vision. Following Offa's annexation of Kent in the year 785, he gained access to the prestigious Mint at Canterbury. This allowed him to undertake major reforms of the currency, becoming the first Mercian king to issue coins bearing his own name, a clear assertion of royal power and economic control. Among the coins minted during his reign, one stands out for its singularity, a coin struck in the name of Queen Cynthryth, Offa's wife. She remains the only Anglo-Saxon woman to have been honoured in such a way during her husband's rule, a reflection of her prominence and Offa's exceptional regard for her. Another remarkable artefact of Offa's reign is his gold dinar, a coin modelled directly on one issued by Abbasid Caliph al-Munsur. One side bears the Latin inscription Offa Rex or King Offa, while the other features a backward rendering of the Arabic phrase, "There is no God but Allah alone." The inclusion of Islamic text, clearly misunderstood by the moneyer who copied it, likely reflects an attempt to facilitate trade with the Islamic world, particularly Islamic Spain. This coin, rare and symbolically rich, underscores Offa's international outlook and his ambitions to engage in the broader economic networks of the medieval world. The dawn of the Viking Age is traditionally marked by the brutal attack on the monastery at Lindisfarne in the year 793, yet the first recorded encounter between the English and the seafaring Norsemen predates that event and occurred during the reign of King Offa of Mercia. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, in the year 787, it is written, "First came 3 ships of Northmen out of Hordaland. The local reeve rowed out to meet them, intending to escort them to the king's town, for he did not know who they were, and there they slew him. These were the first ships of Danish men to seek the land of the English nation." This brief but violent encounter marked the ominous arrival of a new and terrifying force on England's shores. Further evidence of Offa's awareness of this growing danger appears in a royal charter dated in the year 792. In it, Offa issues instructions to prepare Kent for defence against seagoing pagans with roaming ships. This reference is likely to the early Viking raiders, and suggests that sporadic coastal attacks had already begun, and that Offa was among the first rulers to recognise the emerging threat. His actions in reinforcing Kent's defences reveal not only strategic prudence, but also the early stirrings of a national response to what would become a centuries-long struggle against Viking incursions. Offa, ever the vigilant king, was already taking steps to guard his realm against a storm rising from the northern seas. King Offa of Mercia would die in the year 796, at approximately the age of 56. His passing marked the end of an extraordinary reign, one carved in blood, crowned in glory, and destined to shape the course of English history. Though he was succeeded by his son Ecgfrith, the young king's rule was fleeting, lasting a mere 141 days before his untimely death. With Ecgfrith's fall, the line of Offa came to a sudden end. The Northumbrian scholar Alcuin, writing from the court of Charlemagne, acknowledged Offa's relentless determination to secure his son's succession. Yet, in his sombre reflection, he hinted at a divine reckoning, writing, "Ecgfrith has not died for his own sins, but the vengeance for the blood his father shed to secure the kingdom has reached the son." Offa had not hesitated to eliminate rivals to ensure his legacy, a legacy he sought to pass on at all costs. Modern historians like Simon Keynes have described Offa as a man driven by raw ambition rather than a unifying vision. Yet to reduce his legacy for a mere hunger for power is to overlook the towering magnitude of his achievements. The annals that survive, chiefly the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, a West Saxon account, fail to capture the full breadth of Offa's greatness. Their silence speaks not to his insignificance, but to the deliberate erasure of a Mercian king whose power once eclipsed all rivals. Offa was not merely a regional ruler, he was a king of kings. His royal charters testify to a sovereign who styled himself as the King of the English, and the King of Mercia and the surrounding peoples. And who could doubt the truth in those titles? He ruled from sea to sea, building the mighty Offa's Dyke, a monumental frontier that stands to this day as a symbol of his authority and vision. Curiously, Offa was never named Bretwalda, an Old English term meaning the ruler of Britain, a title later granted to Egbert of Wessex, whose power paled in comparison. This omission too is telling. It reflects the subtle bias of West Saxon scribes, who chose to rise up their own and leave Mercian greatness to the shadows of history. However, glimpses of his greatness are seen throughout history. Aethelstan Atheling, a warrior prince and the eldest son of Ethelred the Unready, who was a later king of England, would keep Offa's sword as his prized possession, reflecting Offa's reputation and the tales of him that had survived into the 11th century. So perhaps Offa was, in his own way, the first true king of England, long before Aethelstan of Wessex, who was the first official king of England. Thus, Offa's story, dimmed by rival chroniclers, deserves to be remembered not as a footnote, but as the prelude to England's monarchy. In the annals of English history, the name Alfred the Great resonates with echoes of valour, wisdom, and resilience. Alfred ascended to the throne of Wessex in the year 871, inheriting a kingdom on the brink of collapse. His reign, marked by unwavering determination and strategic brilliance, earned him the epithet the Great. Alfred's enduring legacy as the saviour of Wessex lies in his remarkable ability to transform adversity into triumph, ultimately preserving the spirit and identity of his kingdom. As the King of Wessex, from the years 871 to 899, Alfred's legacy transcends his time, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural, political, and intellectual foundations of England. Alfred, born into royalty, would have the enormous task of defending Wessex from the Viking invaders, who had already taken the ancient kingdoms of East Anglia and Northumbria. The neighbouring kings were dropping like flies, and it fell to Alfred to defend the last Saxon kingdom. This is his story. Alfred was born in the village of Wanting, in Berkshire in the year 849. He was the youngest of 5 sons, sired by King Ethelwulf of Wessex and his first wife, Osburh. As the youngest sibling, he was not groomed for kingship. His older brothers were expected to inherit the throne, leaving Alfred free to pursue his intellectual pursuits and personal interests. The lack of immediate royal responsibilities allowed him the freedom to delve into education and learning, fostering a deep love for knowledge and culture that would later define his reign. Ethelwulf, Alfred's father, was a notable warrior and had defeated the armies of Vikings on several occasions. Alfred's oldest brother was Aethelstan, who ruled as the King of Kent and was known as a fierce fighter. However, he would die before his father in the year 851. Ethelbald was the second born, and then came Ethelbert, and then Ethelred, and finally there was Alfred. In the year 853, at the age of 4, Alfred is reported by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle to have accompanied his father King Ethelwulf to Rome, where he was confirmed by Pope Leo IV. This was a big deal at the time, as barely anyone from Alfred's lands had travelled to Europe, and meeting the Pope would have been the pilgrimage of a lifetime. However, during Alfred's return home from Rome in the year 856, Ethelwulf was deposed by his son Ethelbald and Alfred's eldest brother. Ethelbald, the eldest son of King Ethelwulf, was a prince driven by ambition. In a bold and audacious move, he usurped the throne from his father, sparking a period of political turmoil within Wessex. His actions, driven by a hunger for power and impatience to rule, plunged the kingdom into uncertainty. The consequences of this usurpation were far-reaching, affecting not only the political landscape, but also the lives of those close to the throne, including a young and impressionable Alfred. With civil war looming, the magnates of the realm met in council to arrange a compromise. Ethelbald would retain the western shires, and Ethelwulf would rule in the east. When King Ethelwulf died in the year 858, Wessex was claimed by Ethelbald, who has a rather negative reputation according to later chroniclers and historians. William of Malmesbury, the foremost English historian of the 12th century, wrote, "Ethelbald, who was worthless and disloyal to his father, defiled his father's marriage bed, for after his father's death, he sank so low as to marry his stepmother Judith. However, Judith may have done this to avoid the usual fate of widows being sent to a convent. To Ethelbald, this marriage was advantageous because of Judith's belonging to the Carolingian dynasty, which would allow him to enhance his status, placing him above his brothers. Ethelwulf's youngest son, Alfred, was a witness to the chaos that ensued after Ethelbald's power grab. These formative years were marked by instability, fear, and uncertainty. Living in the shadow of a usurping brother, Alfred was exposed to the harsh realities of court politics from a young age. The familial discord and the struggle for power would have had a profound impact on his worldview, instilling in him a deep sense of caution, resilience, and determination. Nevertheless, little is known about Ethelbald's reign, and he only lasted on the throne for 2 years, and he fathered no children, leaving the throne to his younger brother Ethelbert in the year 860. When Alfred's older brother Ethelbert ascended to the throne, Alfred would have been around 12 years old, and the new king would appear to be on good terms with his 2 younger brothers, Ethelred and Alfred. The reign of Ethelbert unfolded against a backdrop of relentless Viking invasions that posed a grave threat to the stability of Wessex. These raids tested the mettle of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, demanding strategic acumen and military prowess. Additionally, internal dynastic struggles within Wessex added another layer of complexity to Ethelbert's rule. As he navigated these challenges, the young Alfred observed firsthand the pressures and responsibilities of kingship. Ethelbert's reign began and ended with raids by Vikings. In the year 860, a Viking army sailed from the Somme to England and sacked Winchester, but they were defeated by the men of Hampshire and Berkshire. Probably in the autumn of the year 864, another Viking army camped on Thanet and were promised money in return for peace, but they broke their promise and ravaged eastern Kent. These attacks were minor compared with events after Ethelbert's death, which would result in the whole of England being overrun by the great heathen army. Ethelbert died of unknown causes in the autumn of the year 865. He was buried at Sherborne Abbey in Dorset, beside his brother Ethelbald, and was succeeded by his younger brother Ethelred. 3 of Alfred's older brothers had now died childless, and the reigns of his older brothers had moulded him into a man. Alfred would have been around 16 years old when his older brother Ethelred took the crown, and although his brother would prove to be a capable ruler, the threat the whole of England faced was something that had not been seen since the time of the Romans. Previously, the country had suffered from sporadic raids, but now it faced invasion, aiming at conquest and settlement. A large force of Vikings, called by contemporaries the Great Heathen Army, arrived in East Anglia. The Ragnarsons had arrived in the country and were seeking revenge in Northumbria for the death of their father, Ragnar Lothbrok. The Ragnarsons consisted of Ubba, Ivar the Boneless, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Bjorn Ironside, and Halfdan, all capable and legendary warriors, commanding their own armies. King Edmund purchased a peace by paying tribute to the Vikings, and they would stay a year in East Anglia, building up their strength. The Vikings then made their way to York and conquered Northumbria, installing a puppet king. Sigurd and Bjorn Ragnarsson would go back to their own kingdoms after the fall of Northumbria. Meanwhile, Ivar, Ubba and Halfdan would remain burning and pillaging. Ivar the Boneless had just put an end to the line of kings in Northumbria, and he and his great pagan army were on the move south with the intention to take Mercia as their own. In the year 867, they took Nottingham in Mercia and spent the winter there. King Buchred of Mercia appealed to King Ethelred of Wessex for help. Ethelred and Alfred led a large West Saxon army to Nottingham and besieged the Vikings, but the Vikings refused to leave the safety of the town's defences. The combined Mercian and Wessex armies were unable to breach the earth's ramparts and ditch. Eventually, Bugred bought the Vikings off. The Vikings then went back to York. In the year 869, the Norsemen returned to East Anglia and conquered the kingdom, killing King Edmund. 2 out of the 4 great kingdoms of England had now fallen. However, Ivar the Boneless would go north with his contingent of the great heathen army, leaving command to his brothers Halfdan and Ubba, and the Danish warlord named Guthrum. During Ethelred's reign, Alfred participated in the war effort against the Vikings. This hands-on experience provided him with valuable military skills and tactical knowledge. He learnt the art of warfare, strategic planning, and the importance of adaptability in the face of a relentless enemy. The battles between the great heathen army and the Wessex rulers were marked by extraordinary ferocity, strategic brilliance, and a determination that would shape the fate of a nation. King Ethelred, confronted with this unprecedented threat, displayed remarkable defiance. He marshalled his forces, fortified towns, and engaged the great heathen army in a series of fierce battles. The intensity of these confrontations mirrored the high stakes. The very survival of Wessex and its culture hung in the balance. Ethelred's determination and bravery in face of overwhelming odds inspired his people and showcased the resilience of the Anglo-Saxon spirit. At the end of the year 870, the Vikings attempted to conquer Wessex and made their way from East Anglia to Reading. On the 4th of January, King Ethelred of Wessex and Prince Alfred would meet the Vikings with a Saxon army and fought their way into the town, slaughtering all the Danes outside. This would culminate in the Battle of Reading on the 4th of January in the year 871. When Ethelred's army would reach the town gate, the Vikings under the command of Halfdan Ragnarsson would burst out of the gates, creating a counterattack, completely slaughtering the Saxons. The level of carnage was immense, and King Ethelred and Prince Alfred barely escaped the battlefield with their lives, only escaping due to their better knowledge of the local terrain, which allowed them to lose their Viking pursuers by crossing the river Loddon. Their surviving forces regrouped at Windsor, and 4 days later, Ethelred and Alfred would lead their forces again in the Battle of Ashdown. The Vikings would arrive first and deployed themselves at the top of the ridge, giving them the advantage. They then divided their forces into 2 contingents, one under Ivar's brother King Halfdan, and another under the Viking earls. Alfred sent scouts, who reported this back to him, and Ethelred and himself decided to copy the Viking formation, with Ethelred facing King Halfdan's force, and Alfred's forces would face the other. Before the battle, King Ethelred would retire to his tent for mass, whilst Alfred rallied his men and led his forces to the battlefield. Both the Vikings and the Saxons formed a shield wall and approached one another. Alfred, knowing the enemy had the advantage, decided to attack and led his men in a charge up the hill. The two armies would collide, and the battle would rage on until Ethelred then also led a charge. This would result in a Saxon victory. Ethelred and Alfred would then pursue the Vikings in a blood rage, cutting down all fleeing their wrath, until night fell upon them. Alfred was quickly gaining a repute as a savage warrior and a mighty leader of men. However, the victory was short-lived. 2 weeks later, Ethelred and Alfred were defeated at the royal estate of Basing in the Battle of Basing. Despite facing devastating defeats and the loss of significant territories, Wessex did not yield. The resistance of Ethelred, Alfred and their people was unmatched. However, it was at the Battle of Merton on the 22nd of March in the year 871 where the Vikings turned the tide of the war. Bishop Haemund was killed, as were many important men, and after this battle, a great summer army came to Reading. Afterwards, at Easter, King Ethelred died. It has been widely speculated by historians that Ethelred died from the wounds he acquired over the many back-to-back battles he was involved in against the Vikings. The deaths of Alfred's 4 older brothers, Ethelstan, Ethelbald, Ethelbert and Ethelred, left him as the sole surviving heir to the throne of Wessex. The hopes and expectations of the Wessex dynasty rested solely upon Alfred's shoulders. As the last remaining heir, he was expected not only to continue the lineage, but also defend the kingdom against Viking incursions and internal strife. This immense pressure, coupled with the awareness and challenges faced by his predecessors, compelled Alfred to mature swiftly, developing a keen understanding of the complexities of leadership. The loss of his brothers became a crucible in which Alfred's character was forged. Witnessing the fragility of life and the impermanence of power, he internalized the importance of resilience, determination, and adaptability. These experiences fostered in him a sense of duty towards his people, a commitment to defending his kingdom, and an unwavering resolve to leave a lasting legacy. His brother Ethelred, however, left behind 2 underage sons after his death, Ethelhelm and Ethelwald. Ethelred and Alfred had made an agreement earlier that the surviving brother of the battles would be king. Alfred's ascension to the throne went uncontested, as they needed a man and a leader to lead them through many dark and uncertain days. While Alfred was busy with the burial ceremonies for his brother, the Danes defeated the Saxon army in his absence at an unnamed spot, and then again in his presence at Wilton in May. The defeat at Wilton left Alfred hopeless. How could he remove these Vikings from his lands? He was forced instead to make a peace with them, according to sources that do not tell what the terms of the peace were. Although not mentioned by Asser or by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Alfred probably paid the Vikings silver to leave. For the next 5 years, the Danes occupied other parts of England, and in the year 874, the Vikings overran Mercia and drove its king Buchred into exile, where he went to Rome and would never return to the British Isles. The Vikings then installed the puppet king Ceolwulf, demanding oaths of loyalty from the new king. Following this victory, the great heathen army again split. Halfdan went north to fight against the Picts of Strathclyde, while Guthrum and Ubba continued fighting in Wessex. In the year 876, under their new leader Guthrum, the Danes slipped past the Saxon army and attacked and occupied Wareham in Dorset. Alfred blockaded them, but was unable to take Wareham by assault. He then negotiated a peace, which involved an exchange of hostages and oaths, which the Danes swore on a holy ring associated with the worship of Thor. However, the Danes broke their word, and after killing all the hostages, slipped away under the cover of night. However, many Viking ships had been scattered by a storm, and the Danes were forced to submit and withdraw to Mercia. Guthrum, however, would come up with a cunning plan. In January of the year 878, the Danes made a sudden attack on Chippenham, a royal stronghold in which Alfred had been staying over Christmas. Alfred's personal guard were killed, and he barely escaped with his life. In the face of this devastating loss, Alfred made a strategic decision that would prove pivotal. He retreated to the marshes of Somerset, a region of natural fortifications and strategic advantage. From this secure base, he meticulously reorganized his forces, implementing military reforms and instilling a sense of discipline and unity among his loyal troops. This period of retreat became a transformative experience for Alfred, offering him the opportunity to reflect, strategize, and emerge as a more resilient and strategic leader. However, Guthrum's successful siege and capture of Chippenham in the heart of Wessex sent shockwaves throughout the kingdom. The loss of a major stronghold struck at the very core of Alfred's realm, leaving his people in a state of fear and uncertainty. Wessex was pushed to the brink. With the Viking threat looming large, many began to question the ability of their young king to protect and defend their homeland. A legend originating from 12th century chroniclers tell how when Alfred first fled to the Somerset levels, Alfred was given shelter by a peasant woman who, unaware of his identity, left him to watch some wheaten cakes she had left cooking on the fire. Preoccupied with the problems of his kingdom, Alfred accidentally let the cakes burn and was scolded by the woman upon her return. Alfred, now the king of nothing, had not been told off like that since he was a child, and it brought him some joy. The year 878 was the low mark in the history of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, with all the other kingdoms having fallen to the Vikings. Wessex alone was resisting, but with Alfred in exile in the marshes and no resources, the future of Wessex and England was unclear. Nevertheless, news had reached Alfred on the death of two Ragnarsons. Ubba had been slain at the Battle of Kernwit by the Ealdorman of Devon, Odda, which was a huge blow to the Vikings. In addition, Halfdan had been slain in Dublin in the year 877 by his nephew Bardur Iverson. It seems Halfdan was campaigning to regain his brother Ivar's lost crown in Dublin, but ended up being killed in the Battle of Strangford Lough by his own kin. The death of these two legendary commanders would give Alfred some hope. It was in this moment of solitude and reflection that Alfred resolved to take a bold step to emerge from his hiding and rally his men for a decisive stand against the Viking invaders. Egbert's stone held historical significance, as it was named after King Egbert, Alfred's grandfather, who had united many Anglo-Saxon kingdoms under his rule. Choosing this site to summon his men carried a powerful symbolism. It invoked the spirit of unity and the legacy of Wessex's past glory. By gathering at Egbert's stone, Alfred intended to remind his men of their shared heritage, their ancestral unity, and the importance of defending their homeland against foreign invaders. In May, Alfred rode to Egbert's Stone, where he was met by all the people of Somerset, Wiltshire, and Hampshire, and they rejoiced to see their king. When Alfred emerged from his hiding and called upon his men to gather at Egbert's Stone, his words resonated with a sense of urgency, determination, and hope. He spoke of the resilience of the Anglo-Saxon people, their shared history, and the need to reclaim their homeland from the Vikings. Alfred's unwavering resolve and eloquence inspired his men, instilling in them a newfound determination to fight for their kingdom and their way of life. Alfred had retained the loyalty of the ealdormen, royal reeves, and king's thegns, who had maintained their positions of authority in their lands by not submitting to the Vikings, and would answer Alfred's summons to war. This upcoming battle would decide the fate of Wessex and England, as if the Saxons lost, then the whole of England would be in the hands of the Viking invaders. According to brother Asser, who wrote a biography of Alfred, this is what transpired. Fighting ferociously, forming a dense shield wall against the whole army of the pagans, and striving long and bravely, at last Alfred gained the victory. He overthrew the pagans with a great slaughter, and smiting the fugitives, he pursued them as far as the fortress. Alfred pursued the Danes to their stronghold at Chippenham, and starved them into submission. One of the terms of the surrender was that Guthrum convert to Christianity. 3 weeks later, the Danish chief Guthrum and 29 of his men were baptized at Alfred's court, with Alfred receiving Guthrum as his spiritual son. The Battle of Edington ended in a resounding victory for Alfred and the Anglo-Saxons. Guthrum and his Viking forces were decisively defeated, resulting in the signing of the Treaty of Wedmore. The treaty established clear boundaries between the Anglo-Saxon and Viking territories, bringing a temporary halt to the Viking invasions and securing Wessex from immediate threats. Alfred's victory at Edington allowed him to consolidate his power, fortify his kingdom, and lay the foundation for the eventual unification of England under Wessex's rule. Thus began the quiet years of Alfred's reign. Alfred built up the defences of his kingdom to ensure that it was not threatened by the Danes again. He reorganised his army and built a series of well-defended settlements across southern England. He also established a navy for use against the Danish raiders, who continued to harass the coast. As an administrator, Alfred advocated justice and order, and established a code of laws. He had a strong belief in the importance of education, and learnt Latin in his late 30s. He then arranged, and himself took part in, the translation of books from Latin to Anglo-Saxon. In the year 886, Alfred reoccupied the city of London. Alfred entrusted the city to the care of his son-in-law Ethelred, the ealdorman of Mercia, who had married his daughter Ethelfled, who would later go on to be known as the Lady of Mercia. During this period, almost all chroniclers agree that the Saxon people of pre-unified England submitted to Alfred. This was not, however, the point at which Alfred came to become known as the King of England. In fact, he would never adopt the title for himself, even though he was the king of all the land, in all but name. Alfred's unwavering determination and his ability to inspire his people earned him the title King of the Anglo-Saxons, His diplomatic prowess and military successes gradually led to the unification of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms under the banner of Wessex. Through alliances, strategic marriages, and his reputation as a just and wise ruler, Alfred created a sense of shared identity among the Anglo-Saxon realms. Alfred the Great's legacy as the King of the Anglo-Saxons is a testament to his visionary leadership, political astuteness, and unwavering dedication to his people. His reign not only repelled external threats, but also sowed the seeds of unity and cultural identity, shaping the course of English history. Alfred's achievements as a statesman, military leader, and patron of learning have left an indelible mark on the identity of the English nation, making him not just a king, but a revered architect of united England. Alfred died on the 26th of October in the year 899, at the age of 51. How he died is unknown, although he suffered throughout his life with a painful and unpleasant illness. King Alfred was a great man, portrayed here in a quote by Bishop Asser. He was superior to all of his brothers, both in wisdom and in all good habits, and furthermore, because he was warlike beyond measure and victorious in almost all battles. Although Alfred was troubled by health problems throughout his life, statues of Alfred in Winchester and Wantage portray him as a great warrior. However, evidence suggests that he was not your traditional tall, hulking warrior, and had bouts where he would fall ill. But this wouldn't hold him back, and he never lacked in courage, and fought alongside his men, which, if anything, makes him that much greater. The Viking raids during the 9th century, spearheaded by legendary figures like the Ragnarsons, posed a threat to the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, including Alfred's Wessex. These invaders, driven by conquest and plunder, left a trail of destruction in their wake, challenging the survival for the English way of life. In the face of such dire circumstances, Alfred emerged as the unyielding guardian of his people, determined to repel the Viking invaders and preserve the future of England. Alfred was also extremely lucky, as Halfdan and Ubba would die unexpectedly. Nevertheless, Alfred's resolve was the same, and he would live or die fighting. Alfred the Great's legacy as the saviour of England from the Vikings is a testament to his heroic resolve and the enduring impact on the nation's history. His ability to navigate the most challenging of circumstances, defeat legendary foes, and unite his people in the face of adversity cemented his reputation as one of England's greatest monarchs. Alfred's legacy continues to inspire generations, serving as a reminder of the power of courage, determination, and leadership in safeguarding a nation's future. Upon Alfred's death, his son Edward the Elder would take the crown. However, the power struggle that ensued after the death of Alfred the Great was a tumultuous period in English history. It revealed the challenges of succession, the complexities of internal politics, and the persistent threats posed by external adversaries. However, it also demonstrated the resilience of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and the eventual emergence of a unified England. The struggles and triumphs of this period laid the foundation for the strong, centralised monarchy that would characterise medieval England, leaving a lasting legacy of political stability and national unity. I would like to give a huge thank you to all of my members. Your contribution is valuable to the continuation of the channel, and I appreciate you all immensely. A special thank you to John Sites. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, Be sure to like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you all next week for another History Profile.